I took a lot of pictures on my most recent on-location video to Route 66, and I had some thoughts about them that I wanted to share with the real die-hard photographers out there. So I thought I'd put together this video as kind of a post on-location video, image review, comparison / critique thing. By the way, look at this. I have this calendar, Explore America, classic travel posters. Look at this month. Ain't that a coincidence? You guys probably think I'm obsessed with Route 66. All right, now let's start off with the Polaroids. And in case you're wondering, yes, I do keep my Polaroids in protective sleeves. Now there's not too much to say about the Polaroids. You know, they come out of the camera looking the way they look, and there's not really much you can do to them afterwards, which is kind of the whole point, by the way. That's kind of the point of Polaroids. They come out, they're done. It's awesome. You make real photos. The only thing I'm really going to say about it is I wish I had shot more color. I did about 50-50 black and white compared to color, and I think the color just came out a lot better. Although, you know, if I had shot exclusively color and didn't shoot any black and white, I'd be standing here now saying, you know, I wish I had done some black and white. Probably would have looked really cool in black and white. I wish I had done black and white. But that's just me. Grass is always greener. So let's talk about the 6x6 and 6x7. Which I did all on Portra. And actually, real quick before we get into it, because I know I'm going to get a lot of comments about it. You love this binder, don't you? You love that it's brushed aluminum. You love that it stands upright. You want one of these, don't you? I bet you do. Well, I don't know where to send you. I bought like the last 3 on discount from Amazon several years ago, and I haven't been able to find them since. They're awesome binders. I wish I could get more of them. If anyone out there finds where you can get more of these, let me know, because I would love to be able to recommend it to people and buy more of them myself. All right, back to the pictures. So here's the 6x6 and 6x7 shots, all done on Portra. And I used my Mamiya RZ67, of course, and my Mamiya 75mm lens for a lot of it, tilt shift lens. And I've had quite a few people, since I posted the video, ask me about the tilt shift lens, asking me where do I get that adapter so I can use tilt shift. A couple things I got to point out about it. First off, you can get the tilt shift adapter on eBay, hopefully, if there's one out there. But the main thing is, you can't use just any lens with the tilt shift adapter. You have to get lenses that are designed for using with the tilt shift adapter. Because the thing is, that adapter adds a little bit of space between the camera and the lens. So if you try and use it on a standard lens, you're not going to be able to focus on infinity. So you actually have to get what are called short barrel lenses, designated with an SB for short barrel. That means the lens has been designed a little bit shorter so that when you put it on the tilt shift adapter, it's the proper distance away from the camera. If you don't want to use the tilt shift adapter, but you still want to use the short barrel lens, the lens is too short. So you can't just mount it right on the camera and everything's peachy. You want to get a spacer, the short barrel spacer, if you want to use the short barrel lenses without the tilt shift adapter. But like I said, I use the 75mm. There's a couple other varieties available, but the 75mm is the widest angle available for the Mamiya tilt shift. But let's talk about the pictures. So I shot all these on Kodak Portra, as I mentioned, and that has a really great, kind of beautiful soft color palette. That tends to work quite well out in the desert, I've found. The color tones that you find in the desert tend to work well on Portra. I think they came out pretty good. I like the color palettes. The compositions I feel are pretty cool. You know, some of them are a little Wes Anderson in their simplicity. You know, everything's centered and simple. I guess I kind of naturally lean towards centering things. I don't know if I should fight that or just accept it. Maybe I should just accept it. But whatever the case, I think these shots are pretty cool. They have a nice vibe to them. I will tell you about the scanning process and something that kind of drove me nuts. In scanning these pictures and subsequently adjusting them in Lightroom, I can really drive myself nuts tweaking the color balance. So in other words, I make it a little warm, I think it's perfect, come back 5 minutes later, nah dude, that's way too warm. Make it a little cooler, think it's perfect, come back 5 minutes later again, nah, that's way too cool, what was I thinking? I gotta add some green in it now. So it's this endless back and forth, go on for days trying to get them to look similar to each other, but also just trying to make up my mind as to how the colors should be rendered. But it's really difficult because I look at this on the computer and I'm looking at this on the light table I don't know what that's supposed to look like. It's orange and it's negative. Is that a proper rendition, or is a slightly warmer version the proper rendition? I mean, there's no right answer. There's no exact way it's supposed to be. Really, that's also the benefit to shooting negatives, is that it's not a set in stone thing. You can tweak it a little bit in the computer when you scan it to make it your own, you know, to make it a little softer, a little warmer, a little cooler, a little more green, a little more magenta, a little stronger colors, a little weaker colors. That's the flexibility. But when you're neurotic like I am, that's too many options, man. I can't make up my mind, and I'll sit there and I'll go back and forth and I'll tweak it 1% this way, 1% that way, 1% this way, and I can just kind of go insane trying to get it perfect. When there is no perfect, there's no right answer, and I just need to learn to call it quits when it's something that I'm pleased with. But that's one of the things I like about transparency film. You know, when you shoot transparency film, it comes out of the camera, and that's the way it looks. If the scan matches how it looks on the light table, then that's a good scan. It's very easy. It's yes or no. It's binary. It's 1 or 0. But negative film, it's much more flexible. Now on to the 6x17s. Well, let's look first at the Velvia. So you'll see here, I took 4 frames of the same composition. What I did was, the first shot is the picture as I metered it, so that's what I think the correct exposure would be. The second shot is bracketed 2/3 of a stop brighter. Generally speaking, I don't like bracketing, especially on film. Seems like a colossal waste of film to me. Just be good at metering, and then you won't have to bracket and waste film. That being said, color transparency film is a lot less forgiving of incorrect exposure than like color negative film is. So in other words, if you're shooting Kodak Portra and your exposure's off a little bit, it's not that big a deal. You can fix that in the scanner pretty easily. But if your exposure is off on transparency film like this, there's a good chance it'll ruin the picture. So that's why bracketing on transparency film makes a little more sense to me. Bracketing on digital, by the way, go nuts. Be as sloppy as you want. It's free. But on film, I think just be a better photographer, learn manual metering properly, and then you won't have to rely on bracketing so much. And in fact, these pictures prove that. The first picture, which I thought was the correct exposure, did end up being the correct exposure. The 2/3 of a stop brighter bracket was unnecessary anyway. So I should have trusted my technique in the first place. The third shot here is also what I thought was the correct exposure, so it's back to the original exposure, but with a 3-stop hard edge split neutral density filter made by Lee Filters. So that split neutral density filter I put onto my camera to darken the sky a little bit, and you'll see the exposure came out great. It looks much better than the original exposure with no filter. So that split ND was very useful. And then the final frame here is the same as the third frame, so it has the split ND, but it's 2/3 of a stop brighter bracketed again. But as you'll see, it's too bright. So again, didn't really need to bracket here. It's a waste of film. Let's look at the Kodak Portrait stuff now. Compared to Velvia, Portra, you'll notice the colors are much softer. They're not nearly as saturated. The contrast is a lot weaker on Portra. It's a very strong contrast on Velvia. That's how transparency film is. And so what that equates to is the shadows in Portra have a lot more detail than they do on Velvia. And the highlights technically have more detail as well. And the reason for that is dynamic range. And that's really mostly what I want to talk about in this video, is dynamic range and how it pertains to film. So dynamic range is how wide of a range of brightnesses measured in stops, that's a halving or doubling of light, the range of brightnesses that a film can handle before it just loses detail in the highlights and shadows. So for instance, let's say the darkest dark in your scene and the brightest bright in your scene, let's say those were 8 stops apart from each other. So in other words, the brightest bright is 8 stops brighter than the darkest dark. But your film can only handle 6 stops. Well, the shadows are going to go a little black and the highlights are going to go white. You're going to lose detail on both ends because you're 2 stops beyond what the film can handle. I've done extensive testing on Velvia, and the dynamic range of Velvia is about 6 stops. So in other words, if you take 0 as middle tone, If you go anything further than -3 in the shadows, it's just black. Anything beyond +3 in the highlights just comes out white. So +3 to -3, that's the dynamic range of Velvia. That's what it can handle. Portra, I haven't done extensive testing, but just based on shooting with it for a few years, I would say it's got to be at least 10 stops. So it has a much wider dynamic range than Velvia. So it can handle a wider contrast range than Velvia can. So when I was composing the shot and trying to determine if I could use Velvia in the scene, what I was determining was how much darker is the darkest shadow compared to the brightest highlight. If I put the darkest shadow at -3 and then the brightest highlight comes out at +4 on my meter, Velvia is going to lose some highlight detail. But this is why when you see color transparency shots, a lot of times the shadows look completely black and some of the highlights look completely white. It means the dynamic range of the environment, the brightest bright and the darkest dark in the environment, were beyond the 6-stop range of the film. This is one of the reasons color negative film is so much easier to use. The dynamic range is so much wider, so you don't lose shadow detail and highlight detail as easily. When you're using transparency film like this, you have to be so much more careful about your metering, because if the shadows are a little beyond that -3 mark, or the highlights are a little beyond that +3 mark, they just lose detail and you're done for. But it also creates a really cool look. You know, that higher contrast creates a very different look. Now let's compare when the sun came out versus when the sun wasn't out. First looking at the Velvia here. So when the sun comes out, you'll notice the shadows are much harder edged. You got that sharp diagonal shadow underneath the overhang. But also the contrast is just so much stronger. You know, the brightest brights on the edge of the wall here are a lot brighter than they are in the cloudy version. You'll notice too the sky looks a lot darker in the version where the sun came out. That's because when the sun comes out, I have to drop my exposure to account for the extra sunlight on the building, and then the sky comes out darker as a result. Same goes for Portra. When I compare the Portra shots with and without the sun shining, the shadow is harder, the highlights are brighter, and the shadows are darker. There's extra contrast. So when the sun comes out, you get a very different look. And then this shot of the old garage from across the street, that was when the sun was out, so I had really strong shadows. I think that worked really well for this subject because you got the slats on the roof casting those diagonal shadows along the back wall, which I think is really awesome. This picture would not be nearly as interesting without that those shadow details, which I think was nice. This particular picture ended up being, I think, my favorite from the entire trip. I love that building, the old signage on it. It's just so cool, man. It's got so much character. But I can't decide which I like better, the Portra version or the Velvia version, as I mentioned in my video. I kind of like the popping, contrasting colors of Velvia, but then again, the soft color palette of Portra is pretty cool too. So that's just me again, unable to make up my mind. You know, if I was smart, I would probably just shoot one film, stick to that, and never use any other film. Because what happens is I shoot these different films and then I stand here and I'm like, well, that one has merits, that's cool. I like this one too though. That's kind of cool, but so is that. And then I sit here driving myself nuts trying to pick out which one I like more. But if I only shot one film ever, that would be it. I would either like it or I wouldn't, and then I could just move on with my life. But I'm addicted to variety, what can I say? Now as the sunset wore on, I went back and photographed that old rundown house. I used a warming filter on these, by the way. So I put a warming filter on to make that sunset light even more orangey colored. Definitely did its trick. You know, you got those real bright yellows and oranges in the scene. Then the next two pictures, the buildings from across the street. I had set up this shot a little bit before the sunset, and took this first frame before the color really flared up. And then I was just kind of waiting to see what the color would do. So I waited around for a little while. The clouds started getting better and better and better, and then they were just lit up all orange and yellow, and then I got that second frame there. Both of these pictures, I did use a split neutral density filter to darken the sky a little bit. The sky would have been too bright and lost its color if I didn't use the split ND. I don't remember how strong it was. I think it was a 3-stop, 0.9, but I don't remember for sure. All of these pictures here, the house and the two buildings from across the street, were done with my 90mm lens. And the 90mm lens is wide angle, so it has the same problem that all wide angles have, which is you get light fall off towards the edge of the frame. So in other words, the corners and the sides get darker. That's just physics. That's because the lens is so close to the film that the light has to travel a much greater distance to get to the edges than it does towards the center. So what happens is the edges go dark. Unless you have a center ND filter. So it's a neutral density filter, but it's only dark in the middle of the filter. That darkens the center of the frame to even it out with the outside of the frame, and then you get a nice even exposure like I did here. Center ND filters can make the process kind of difficult because you have to meter the scene, compose it without the filter, and then put the filter on, add 1 2/3 of a stop to your exposure because the center ND is going to take some away, and then take the shot at those exposure settings. It's just, you couple that with using a split ND, and there's a lot of room to make mistakes. You can miscalculate exposure super easily if you don't factor in each filter, and you don't factor in reciprocity if you're getting into long exposures. It's just, there's so many ways it can go wrong. So I gotta be honest, I'm pretty impressed with myself. I didn't make any mistakes on these. I'm lying, I did make a big mistake later on. I was shooting the buildings across the street. The sunset got even crazier. It was all pink and stuff. I took a picture, it probably came out great. And then I had 1 frame left and I was hustling. I wanted to fire off 1 more frame of the house. But old Nick forgot to wind the film to the next frame. So I got myself a double exposure. Really bummed about that one because both of those pictures probably would have been cool. The colors were insane. It was super pink. It would have been awesome to see them. But I had too much on my plate. I was thinking about too much and I forgot to wind the film. Rookie mistake. How dare I? So there you have it. That's my image review / critique comparison video thing. Hope you guys liked it. Again, thank you so much for the positive feedback on the Route 66 video. It really gives me motivation to do more of these, and I do want to do more of them. I really do. If I could do this for a living, that's all I would do. But my schedule is just a little crazy with work. Hopefully I can get some more time to do some more videos soon. But thanks again. See you guys next time.